In 1886, an archaeologist named Edmund Carstairs made a discovery beneath Rome that would cost him his sanity. He found 7 stone doors in a forgotten imperial tomb, and in his final journal entry, written in trembling handwriting, he left only 5 words. I opened the 7th door.
What Edmund had stumbled upon wasn't just another Roman ruin. He had discovered evidence of one of Rome's most secretive and terrifying military rituals, a ceremony so dangerous that it was only performed upon the death of an emperor, and only by soldiers who had already accepted their own deaths. This is the story of the Door Warriors, Rome's guardians against something far more terrifying than any barbarian army, the return of the imperial dead.
Let me take you back to Rome, 117 AD. Emperor Trajan has just died, and the Senate has confirmed Hadrian as his successor. But before Hadrian can truly claim his throne, an ancient ritual must be performed, one that dates back to Rome's earliest days, to the time when the boundaries between the living and dead were believed to be dangerously thin. According to fragmentary texts discovered in the Vatican archives in the 1920s, Roman military tradition held that when an emperor died, his soul would attempt to return through 7 celestial gates, corresponding to 7 physical doorways built into his tomb. The first 6 doors represented the emperor's virtues: justice, valor, wisdom, mercy, strength, and divine right. But the 7th door? The 7th door was different. The Romans called it Porta Mortis Redux, the Gate of Death's Urn. The ritual required 7 soldiers, chosen by lot from the Praetorian Guard. These men were volunteers, but volunteering was considered the highest honor and the most terrifying duty a soldier could accept. They would be sealed inside the emperor's tomb for 7 nights, standing guard at each of the 7 doors. Their mission? To ensure the 7th door was never opened before dawn on the 8th day. Why? Because Roman belief held that if the 7th door was opened prematurely, the emperor's soul would return, but not as it had been in life. It would return as something hungry, something vengeful, something that would drag the living world into the realm of the dead. The soldiers chosen for this duty knew they might not survive. Ancient accounts speak of guards found dead at their posts, their faces frozen in expressions of absolute terror, with no marks on their bodies and no explanation for their deaths. Now, fast forward to Rome, October 1886. Edmund Carstairs was a British archaeologist working with the newly formed Italian Archaeological Society. He was excavating beneath the Basilica of Maxentius when his workers broke through into a chamber that, according to all records, shouldn't have existed. What they found was a perfectly preserved imperial burial chamber, but one that appeared in no historical record. The style suggested it was built during the late Antonine period, around 180 AD, possibly for Emperor Commodus, though no body was ever found within. But it was the chamber's architecture that stopped Edmund cold. 7 stone doors, each carved with intricate reliefs, stood in a semicircle around a central altar. The doors were small, barely 5 feet high, and were set into the walls not as entrances, but as symbolic portals. Each door bore inscriptions in archaic Latin, and each was sealed with bronze locks that had corroded over centuries. Edmund's journal, now housed in the British Museum's restricted collection, describes his initial excitement. He spent days documenting each door, photographing the reliefs, transcribing the inscriptions. The first 6 doors were magnificent. Each depicted one of the imperial virtues through elaborate mythological scenes. But the 7th door was different. While the others were covered in gold leaf and precious stones, the 7th door was plain stone, almost crude in comparison. Its only decoration was a single phrase carved deep into the rock: Claudite hanc portum dum lux reddit. Keep this door closed until light returns. and beneath that, in smaller letters, a warning. Vita mortem sequitur, si porta aperta est. Life follows death if the door is opened. Edmund decided to spend nights in the chamber, hoping to complete his documentation without the crowds of curious Romans who had begun gathering at the excavation site. He hired 2 local workers to stay with him, but both refused after the first night, claiming they heard voices coming from behind the doors. Edmund dismissed this as superstition. His journal entries from the first 3 nights are routine: measurements, observations, sketches. But on the 4th night, October 23rd, his writing changes. He notes that around midnight he began to hear what sounded like footsteps in the chamber. Though he was alone, he describes them as the measured tread of soldiers on patrol. He searched the entire space. There was no one there, and no way for sound to enter from the excavations above. On the 5th night, the footsteps returned, but now they were accompanied by something else, a low, rhythmic sound like marching drums, though Edmund could find no source. His journal entry ends with a note that chills the blood. The sound stops at each door, as if someone, or something, is checking the locks. The 6th night, Edmund's handwriting becomes erratic. He writes that he can now hear voices, 7 distinct voices, speaking in Latin. They seem to be counting over and over. Una, due, tres, quatuor, quinque, sex. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but never 7, always stopping at 6, then starting over. And then he writes something that suggests he was beginning to understand what he had found. I believe this chamber was never meant to house the dead emperor's body. It was meant to house the door warriors, the guards themselves. I have found what appeared to be 7 small alcoves, each positioned in front of one of the doors, each just large enough for a man to stand in. On the floor of each alcove, there are stains, very old stains, dark brown, almost black. I believe they are blood.
October 27th, 1886, the 7th night. Edmund Carstairs' final journal entry is barely legible. The handwriting lurches across the page, words crossed out, sentences fragmentary. I'll read you what can be deciphered. The voices are no longer behind the doors. They are in the chamber with me. I can see nothing, but I can hear them, speaking urgently in Latin. They are warning me. They are telling me to leave. But I cannot leave. I must understand. The 7th door, it is different from the others. While the other 6 doors are sealed from the outside, the 7th door is sealed from the inside. Do you understand? The locks are on the inside. Something was meant to be kept in, not out. Midnight. The voices have stopped. The chamber is silent in a way that is not natural. It is not the silence of an empty room. It is the silence of something holding its breath. I can see light coming from beneath the 7th door. Impossible. There is only solid rock behind these doors. But there is light, flickering like torchlight, and with it comes a smell. Decay. Death. But more than that, the smell of a battlefield, of blood and bronze and smoke. The light is growing brighter. The bronze lock on the 7th door is beginning to glow as if heated from within. I can hear a voice now, just one voice, speaking in Latin. It is commanding, imperial. It is saying, Apere portam, redio ad regnum meum. Open the door, I return to my kingdom. God help me, I understand now. This chamber was built for Emperor Commodus, who was strangled in his bath, who was denied a proper death, who was erased from the records. The Senate performed the ritual,
But Commodus died by murder, not natural causes. The ritual was incomplete. The seventh door was never properly sealed because the emperor's death violated the sacred protocols. And for 1,700 years, the door warriors have stood guard. Not in body, their bodies died long ago, but in spirit. They have been here, counting the doors, checking the locks, trying to hold back what wants to come through. But I have disturbed the chamber. I have documented the doors. I have spoken their names aloud, and in doing so, I have weakened the seal. The seventh door is opening. I can see a hand, no, not a hand, a skeletal hand wearing an imperial ring reaching around the edge of the door. Behind it, I can see movement in the darkness, shapes, many shapes. They are the dead of Rome, all the dead who followed Commodus into the afterlife, and they are trying to follow him back. I opened the seventh door.
Edmund Carstairs was found the next morning by workers arriving at the excavation site. He was standing in front of the seventh door, his eyes open but unseeing, his body rigid. He was alive, technically, but he never spoke again. He was committed to an asylum in London, where he died 3 months later. The chamber was sealed by order of the Italian government. The official reason given was structural instability, but Edmund's journal suggests a different motivation. The last page, written by someone else, possibly a government official, contains only a brief note in Italian. The seventh door was found standing open. All 7 bronze locks had been melted from the inside. The chamber has been filled with concrete. This site is never to be excavated again. But here's the truly disturbing part. In 1943, during World War II, Allied bombing damaged the Basilica of Maxentius. When engineers inspected the foundations, they discovered that the concrete seal had cracked. They reported hearing sounds coming from beneath, the measured tread of footsteps, the rhythm of marching drums, and voices counting in Latin. Una, due, tres, quator, quinque, sex, septem. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. For the first time in 1,700 years, the count was complete. The chamber was sealed again with steel reinforcement this time, but sometimes, late at night, workers in the area report hearing soldiers marching beneath the streets of Rome, and occasionally, tourists taking photographs near the Basilica of Maxentius capture something strange in their images: the faint outline of 7 figures in a Roman military garb, standing in formation, facing something that the camera cannot see. The door warriors are still on duty, still holding the line between the living and the dead. And the seventh door, remains in the darkness, neither fully open nor fully closed, waiting for someone to make the same mistake Edmund Carstairs made, waiting for someone to complete the count.
This has been Dark Past Tales. Remember, some doors in history were sealed for a reason. Some guards stand eternal watch, not because they choose to, but because they must. And some rituals, once begun, can never truly end. The past is not dead. Sometimes, it's just waiting behind the right door.